So you've made it to week 2. Congratulations. I hope that you enjoyed The Landlady last week by Roald Dahl. Roald Dahl is one of my favorites, and I love to start out with Roald Dahl. The Landlady is probably one of my favorites by him of his short stories. So this week we're looking at Frank Stockton and 2 of his short stories, The Lady or the Tiger and The Discourager of the Hesitancy. Before we get started with our short story, I want to share with you a little bit about Frank Stockton and also a little background on the story. So if you'll give me just a moment before we start the story, I'd like to give you a little bit of background. Frank Stockton was born in 1834 and he died in 1902. So we're talking a long way back, just before the turn of the century. His dad wanted him to be a doctor. As plans usually go, he didn't want to be what his parents wanted him to be. He wanted to be something else, and that something else was a writer. He was also somewhat of an inventor, but lucky for us, he wanted to be a writer. And he wrote a lot of stuff, so much so that he wrote 23 volumes of work. But the only 2 that he's really known for are The Lady or the Tiger and The Discourager of the Hesitancy. And so these are really what he's known for. He died, like I said, in 1902. This story, The Lady or the Tiger, was published in 1882. It was first published in a magazine. Back then, if you wanted to publish a short story, you published it in a magazine. So it was published in Century Magazine in 1882. And then finally was put into a collection of stories. But that's how this story got out. As far as the story itself, it's really kind of set up like a fairy tale. We think this takes place in the Middle East, but it's very vague because it starts out very much like a fairy tale. It starts out in the very olden time, which sounds very similar to Once Upon a Time, just like a fairy tale. And so it's very vague. And so we want to think of this like a fairy tale. In the Middle Ages, you've probably heard of people doing practices to decide punishment. And so this is very much like this. An accused person was put through a trial of some kind of physical trial to decide their innocence or guilt. So you probably heard of the witch trials where they were put through some kind of physical trial of some kind to figure out if they were innocent or guilty, and it was kind of ridiculous. This is kind of the same thing. And they believed that supernatural forces would decide your innocence or guilt. So it wasn't really up to a jury. It was more up to chance to decide. I also want you to think about, as we go through the story, I want you to think about conflict. This story has everything to do with conflict. There are 2 basic types of conflict or struggle. There's internal conflict and there's external conflict. External conflict is between a character and an outside force. So it's between a character in the story and something outside of the character. So it could be between the character and nature. It could be between the character and society, between the character and fate. But it's something outside the character. Internal conflict is the character and their mind. So it's something inside the character. They're struggling with something, their consciousness. So they're torn between the course of action they should take. So I want you to be thinking about the different conflict that's taking place between these different characters and also with the characters themselves in the story. So make sure that you are thinking about that. This will help you tremendously with your assignments that will follow. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started with The Lady or the Tiger. And I hope that you will enjoy it. In the very olden time, there lived a semi-barbaric king. Now, semi-barbaric, barbaric means that he is uncivilized. And so it says he was semi-barbaric, so he's somewhat uncivilized, whose ideas, though somewhat polished and sharpened by the progressiveness of distant Latin neighbors, were still large, florid, and untrammeled, as became the half of him which was barbaric. He's very showy, but he's still somewhat uncivilized. He was a man of exuberant fancy and withal of an authority so irresistible that at his will he turned varied fancies into facts. So if he could dream it, he would make it so. He was greatly given to self-communing, and when he and himself agreed upon anything, the thing was done. When every member of his domestic and political systems moved smoothly in its appointed course, his nature was bland and genial. So when things went his way and everything was going like it was supposed to, he was a very happy person. He was very cheerful. But whenever there was a little hitch or some of his orbs got out of their orbits, he was blander and more genial still, for nothing pleased him so much as to make the crooked straight and crush down uneven places. So you would think if things got out of how they were supposed to be running, it would make him angry. But it says that this made him even more happy because he was a fixer and he liked to make things right. He liked to fix things. And so this made him even happier to be able to fix things. Among the borrowed notions by which his barbarism had become semified was that of the public arena, in which by exhibitions of manly and beastly valor, the minds of his subjects were refined and cultured. He brought culture to his people. But even here, the exuberant and barbaric fancy asserted itself. The arena of the king was built not to give the people an opportunity of hearing the rhapsodies of dying gladiators, nor to enable them to view the inevitable conclusion of a conflict between religious opinions and hungry jaws, but for purposes far better adapted to widen and develop the mental energies of the people. So he did not have this arena built just to have gladiators riding around in their chariots in this arena and to fight. He did not have this arena built just to throw religious people in here to have them eaten by tigers. He had something far better in mind, in his opinion, to make people think. This vast amphitheater, with its encircling galleries, its mysterious vaults, and its unseen passages, was an agent of poetic justice, in which crime was punished, or virtue rewarded, by the decrees of an impartial and incorruptible chance. So he had this arena built to decide if a person was guilty or innocent. When a subject was accused of a crime of sufficient importance to interest the king, now it doesn't say everything went before the king, just things that interested him. Public notice was given that on an appointed day, the fate of the accused person would be decided in the king's arena, a structure which well deserved its name. For although its form and plan were borrowed from afar, its purpose emanated solely from the brain of this man, who every barleycorn a king knew no tradition to which he owed more allegiance than pleased his fancy, and who engrafted on every adopted form of human thought and action the rich growth of his barbaric idealism. And that's a long sentence. So let's break that down a little bit. First of all, he didn't try every trial in this arena. It was only the ones that he took specific interest in. Second, it talks about that the structure was not his own design. It was a design that he borrowed from someone else. But the reason, the purpose of the arena was something that he came up with from his own weird little mind. And it says that he called him every barleycorn a king. A barleycorn was a unit of measurement. And so it says he was every barleycorn a king means that he was a king in every way, every inch. In every way, he was a king. And he developed this tradition of trying these people in this arena. He came up with this. When all the people had assembled in the galleries, and the king, surrounded by his court, sat high upon his throne of royal state on one side of the arena, he gave a signal. A door beneath him opened, and the accused subject stepped out into the amphitheater. Directly opposite him, on the other side of the enclosed space, were two doors, exactly alike and side by side. It was the duty and privilege of the person on trial to walk directly to these two doors and open one of them. He could open either door he pleased. He was subject to no guidance or influence but that of the aforementioned impartial and incorruptible chance. So he would walk, the king would sit in the arena, a door underneath him would open, a person would walk out, and there were two identical doors in front of him, and he could choose either one of those doors that he wanted to. Nobody told him which door to pick. He could choose either door that he wanted to choose. Didn't matter. He could choose either of those. It doesn't matter. But it does matter. If he opened the one, there came out of it a hungry tiger, the fiercest and most cruel that could be procured, which immediately sprang upon him and tore him to pieces as a punishment for his guilt. The moment that the case of the criminal was thus decided, doleful iron bells were clanged, great wails went up from the hired mourners posted on the outer rim of the arena, and the vast audience with bowed heads and downcast hearts wended slowly their way homeward, mourning greatly that one so young and fair or so old and respected should have merited so dire a fate. Now let's take a look at this for just a minute. So if he opened one door, a hungry tiger came out and they said, well, he must have been guilty or he wouldn't have picked the one with the tiger. But there's something else here. The king had thought of everything because it said that he had hired mourners. He had hired people to cry and be sad over this person that had just died. So these people he hired to cry over this guy, which I think is even more demented, that he had hired somebody to cry over this guy. But if the accused person opened the other door, there came forth from it a lady, the most suitable to his years and station that his majesty could select among his fair subjects. And to this lady he was immediately married as a reward for his innocence. It mattered not that he might already possess a wife and family, or that his affections might be engaged upon an object of his own selection. The king allowed no such subordinate arrangements to interfere with his great scheme of retribution and reward. So let's think about this just a minute. If he opened the other door, a lady came out. Now, this is great because it proves that he's innocent, or else he wouldn't have picked that door. So he's innocent. But it didn't matter that he was already married. He had to marry this lady anyway. So this tells us that the king was okay with polygamy, or being married to more than one person. Two, the king didn't care if he was already in love with somebody else. That didn't matter to the king. He still had to go ahead and marry this person because the king said he didn't really care what you had going on. He was not going to let anything get in the way of his perfect system. Nothing else mattered but this system. So he didn't really care. The exercises, as in the other instance, took place immediately and in the arena. Another door opened beneath the king, and a priest, followed by a band of choristers, and dancing maidens blowing joyous airs on golden horns, and treading an epithalamic measure, advanced to where the pair stood side by side, and the wedding was promptly and cheerily solemnized. Then the gay brass bells rang forth their merry peals, people shouted glad hurrahs, and the innocent man, preceded by children strewing flowers on his path, led his bride to his home. This was the king's semi-barbaric method of administering justice. So this is how he decided if people were innocent or guilty. They decided it themselves. And if they chose the wrong door, well, that was on them. Its perfect fairness is obvious. The criminal could not know out of which door would come the lady. He opened either he pleased, without having the slightest idea whether in the next instant he was to be devoured or married. On some occasions, the tiger came out of one door, and on some out of the other. The decisions of this tribunal were not only fair, they were positively determinate. The accused person was instantly punished if he found himself guilty, and if innocent, he was rewarded on the spot, whether he liked it or not. There was no escape from the judgments of the king's arena. So really, is he punished either way? Is he rewarded either way? I don't know. That's something to think about. The institution was a very popular one. Now think about why it would be popular. Are we talking about popular among his subjects? Are we talking popular among criminals. When the people gathered together on one of the great trial days, they never knew whether they were to witness a bloody slaughter or a hilarious wedding. This element of uncertainty lent an interest to the occasion which it could not otherwise have attained. Thus, the masses were entertained and pleased, and the thinking part of the community could bring no charge of unfairness against this plan. For did not the accused person have the whole matter in his own hands? You can't say it was not fair. The person chooses their own fate, right? And it says the masses were pleased. But think about reality TV. If you think this is not something that they should be watching, think about reality TV and think about the things that we watch. Think about the things that we see on TV. Think about a car wreck and how we slow down to look, how backed up traffic becomes because people want to see it. Or if you see an ambulance go by on your road or a fire truck come by on your road, how people stop to stare or people start calling to see where it went. People do that, right? So we're just as guilty. Even though this takes place, we think, long ago, this still happens today. This semi-barbaric king had a daughter, as blooming as his most florid fancies, and with a soul as fervent and imperious as his own. As is usual in such cases, she was the apple of his eye and was loved by him above all humanity. Now, she is just like her daddy, and she is a daddy's girl. Among his courtiers was a young man of that fineness of blood and lowness of station common to the conventional heroes of romance who love royal maidens. You guys all know this story. The princess loves the young man of lowly station. You guys have seen Aladdin, right? He's not a prince, but he wants to be a prince because he loves the princess. And so this is the stuff that love stories are made of, right? This is what they're talking about. And it says this is what love stories do because, you know, he's not a prince, but he loves the princess. This is what they're talking of. This royal maiden was well satisfied with her lover, for he was handsome and brave to a degree unsurpassed in all this kingdom, and she loved him with an ardor that had enough of barbarism in it to make it exceedingly warm and strong. This love affair moved on happily for many months, until one day, dun, 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 the king happened to discover its existence. Pops has found out about it, and he ain't happy. He did not hesitate nor waver in regard to his duty in the premises. The youth was immediately cast into prison, and a day was appointed for his trial in the king's arena. Now let's think about this just a minute. Dad finds out he is not happy, and he thinks, I don't have to put up with this. I'll just put him on trial because he's not supposed to love my daughter. He's not good enough for her, and so he's going to put him on trial. This, of course, was an especially important occasion, and His Majesty, as well as all the people, was greatly interested in the workings and development of this trial. Never before had such a case occurred. Never before had a subject dared to love the daughter of the king. In after years, such things became commonplace enough, but then they were in no slight degree novel and startling. The tiger cages of the kingdom were searched for the most savage and relentless beasts, from which the fiercest monster might be selected for the arena. And the ranks of maiden youth and beauty throughout the land were carefully surveyed by competent judges in order that the young man might have a fitting bride in case fate did not determine for him a different destiny. Of course, everybody knew that the deed with which the accused was charged had been done. He had loved the princess, and neither he, she, nor anyone else thought of denying the fact. But the king would not think of allowing any fact of this kind to interfere with the workings of the tribunal, in which he took such great delight and satisfaction. He's not going to allow the facts to get in the way of anything, just because, it's a fact that he did it. He's not going to let that mess up his trial and his way of doing things. No matter how the affair turned out, the youth would be disposed of, and the king would take an aesthetic pleasure in watching the course of events, which would determine whether or not the young man had done wrong in allowing himself to love the princess. Hey, the king wins no matter what. because either way, he gets rid of this guy. Either the guy dies at the paws of a hungry tiger, or he marries somebody else, and either way, the king wins because he gets rid of him. So it doesn't really matter to him how it goes because he gets rid of him either way. The appointed day arrived. From far and near the people gathered and thronged the great galleries of the arena, and crowds unable to gain admittance massed themselves against its outside walls. Y'all, it's standing room only. The king and his court were in their places, opposite the twin doors, those fateful portals so terrible in their similarity. All was ready. The signal was given. A door beneath the royal party opened, and the lover of the princess walked into the arena. Tall, beautiful, fair, his appearance was greeted with a low hum of admiration and anxiety. Half the audience had not known so grand a youth had lived among them. No wonder the princess loved him. What a terrible thing for him to be here. When he walked out, all the women were like, "Woo, we had no idea somebody like this lived here. Girl, how fine is he?" That's what it says here. It said a low hum of admiration. Girl. And that's exactly what they said, which sounds funny to us, but that's what they would have done. They had no idea somebody this good looking walked out. As the youth advanced into the arena, he turned, as the custom was, to bow to the king. But he did not think of that royal personage at all. His eyes were fixed upon the princess, who sat right to the right of her father. Had it not been for the moiety of barbarism in her nature, it is probable that the lady would not have been there. But her intense and fervid soul would not allow her to be absent on an occasion in which she was so terribly interested. From the moment that the decree had gone forth that her lover should decide his fate in the king's arena, she had thought of nothing, night or day, but this great event and the various subjects connected with it. Possessed of more power, influence, and force of character than anyone who had ever before been interested in such a case, she had done what no other person had done. She had possessed herself of the secret of the doors. So she found out what was going on. She wanted to know which door contained what. And she did it. She did what nobody else did. And she knew which door contained what. She knew in which of the two rooms that lay behind those doors stood the cage of the tiger with its open front, and in which waited the lady. Through these thick doors, heavily curtained with skins on the inside, it was impossible that any noise or suggestion should come from within to the person who should approach to raise the latch of one of them. But gold, and the power of a woman's will, had brought the secret to the princess. Guys, don't ever underestimate your woman, because we will find stuff out. Okay? Don't ever underestimate us. Now, not only did she know in which room stood the lady ready to emerge, all blushing and radiant should her door be opened, but she knew who the lady was. It was one of the fairest and loveliest of the damsels of the court, who had been selected as the reward of the accused youth, should he be proved innocent of the crime of aspiring to one so far above him. And the princess hated her. Often had she seen or imagined that she had seen this fair creature throwing glances of admiration upon the person of her lover. And sometimes she thought these glances were perceived and even returned. So she hated this woman because this woman had been looking at her man and flirting with her man, and she thought that her man might have been flirting back. Now and then she had seen them talking together. It was but for a moment or two, but much can be said in a brief space. It may have been on most unimportant topics, but how could she know that? The girl was lovely, but she had dared to raise her eyes to the loved one of the princess. And with all the intensity of the savage blood transmitted to her through long lines of holy barbaric ancestors, she hated the woman who blushed and trembled behind that silent door. When her lover turned and looked at her, and his eye met hers as she sat there, paler and whiter than anyone in the vast ocean of anxious faces about her, He saw, by that power of quick perception which is given to those whose souls are one, that she knew behind which door crouched the tiger and behind which stood the lady. He had expected her to know it. He understood her nature, and his soul was assured that she would never rest until she made plain to herself this thing, hidden to all other lookers on, even to the king. The only hope for the youth in which there was any element of certainty was based upon the success of the princess in discovering this mystery. And at the moment he looked upon her, he saw that she had succeeded, as in his soul he knew she would succeed. Then it was that his quick and anxious glance asked the question, which? It was as plain to her as if he had shouted it from where he stood. There was not an instant to be lost. The question was asked in a flash. It must be answered in another. Her right arm lay on the cushioned parapet before her. She raised her hand and made a slight, quick movement toward the right. No one but her lover saw her. Every eye but his was fixed on the man in the arena. He turned, and with a firm and rapid step, he walked across the empty space. Every heart stopped beating, every breath was held, every eye was fixed immovably upon that man. Without the slightest hesitation, he went to the door on the right and opened it. Now, the point of the story is this. Did the tiger come out of that door, or did the lady? The more we reflect upon this question, the harder it is to answer. It involves a study of the human heart, which leads us through devious mazes of passion, out of which it is difficult to find our way. Think of it, fair reader, not as if the decision of the question depended upon yourself, but upon that hot-blooded, semi-barbaric princess, her soul at a white heat beneath the combined fires of despair and jealousy. She had lost him, but who should have him? So he's asking, it's not as if you yourself would have made this decision. It's not as if you're making this decision. What decision did the princess make? Remember, it tells you that she had seen this woman flirting with her man. But she'd also agonized over this decision because she loves him. Does she really want to see him die? How often in her waking hours and in her dreams had she started in wild horror and covered her face with her hands as she had thought of her lover opening the door on the other side of which waited the cruel fangs of the tiger. But how much oftener had she seen him at the other door? How in her grievous reveries had she gnashed her teeth and torn her hair when she saw his start of rapturous delight as he opened the door of the lady. How her soul had burned in agony when she had seen him rush to meet that woman with her flushing cheek and sparkling eye of triumph, when she had seen him lead her forth, his whole frame kindled with the joy of a recovered life, when she had heard the glad shouts from the multitude and the wild ringing of the happy bells, when she had seen the priest with his joyous followers advance to the couple and make them man and wife before her very eyes, and when she had seen them walk away together upon their path of flowers, followed by the tremendous shouts of the hilarious multitude, in which her one despairing shriek was lost and drowned. Would it not be better for him to die at once, or go to wait for her in the blessed regions of semi-barbaric futurity? And yet, that awful tiger, those shrieks, that blood, her decision had been indicated in an instant, but it had been made after days and nights of anguished deliberation. She had known she would be asked. She had decided what she would answer, and without the slightest hesitation, she had moved her hand to the right. The question of her decision is not one to be lightly considered, and is not for me to presume to set myself up as the person able to answer it. And so I leave it with all of you. Which came out of the open door? The lady or the tiger?